What's a telltale sign two people are having a secret, intimate relationship with each other? Story 1. I was at this big BBQ with dozens of people there. Among them was this stunning young couple, married, and the wife was visibly pregnant. They showed up with their short, squat, funny man roommate. At one point, he and the pregnant wife were on opposite sides of the kitchen. They didn't speak, didn't even move toward each other, but they locked eyes for a split second, just a flash. It was the only interaction they had all night. That was all it took. In that instant, I have never been more sure that two people were shagging. I turned to my girlfriend and said, "Those two are definitely hooking up." She rolled her eyes and told me to stop being a creep. Fast forward 6 months, turns out they were sleeping together. And the funny guy, he's the dad. After that, total chaos. Friends chose sides. Some got blamed for knowing what was going on and staying silent. The divorce happened fast. I lost touch with that group about a year later, but by then they'd pretty much divided into two camps, Team Funny Man and Team Vanilla Ex-Husband. Honestly, Funny Man really did have a short bald guy with big dong energy though. Before we continue, do us a quick favor, smash that like button and subscribe to support our channel. Story 2. It was pretty obvious that my boss was dating a coworker because they suddenly started talking about each other a lot, out of nowhere. So I casually asked the coworker if they were dating, and he responded with a serious, concerned look and said no. About 10 minutes later, my boss texts me, threatening to make my life miserable if I ever make inappropriate comments like that again. She wasn't even at work that day, so it was clear she'd texted him about it. 5 minutes after that, the coworker approaches me and says, "We are not dating, that's inappropriate to say. Don't bring it up again." So thanks for the confirmation, I guess. Everyone at the sandwich shop was around the same age. Honestly, nobody cares if you're dating, so why act all weird about it? The funny part is that for the next 2 years, my boss would always mention her boyfriend Johnny when talking about her problems. We all knew she was talking about the coworker, but she'd never use his real name. Finally, after 2 years, she admits it was him, but only after they broke up. And of course, we all had to act surprised, like, "Oh my gosh, I had no idea." Story 3. I remember these two coworkers of mine who got caught most unexpectedly, and it all started with a skunk. A skunk had sprayed right outside the guy's house the night before, and it was bad. The next day, they both showed up to work like usual, separately and doing their best to avoid eye contact or interaction, just like they always did, but they both reeked of skunk. The smell was unmistakable. It was so strong that you couldn't ignore it. They thought they were pulling off their little secret, but that skunk smell was a dead giveaway. The funny part was, they didn't even know we knew. They still acted like nothing was going on, completely oblivious to the fact that everyone had already pieced it together. It wasn't the first time they tried to keep things secret, but that was the moment when their secret was out. I just hope that the skunk wasn't a part of their hanky-panky session. Story 4. It's kind of like what Joey from Friends once said, if there's obvious chemistry between two people on stage, chances are there's no chemistry in real life. But if they're acting awkward or overly stiff, like they're trying too hard to downplay any connection, you can pretty much bet something's going on behind the scenes. It's that kind of subtle shift in behavior that gives them away. If you notice two people constantly avoiding each other's contact or doing that thing where they act like they don't care, like they're trying to keep their distance in front of others, there's a good chance they're secretly involved. It's like they're overcompensating for something that everyone else can see, but they're desperately trying to keep it hidden. The more they try to act casual, the more it screams that they're hiding something. But if two people seem comfortable around each other, working seamlessly together, and they're not making a big deal out of their interactions, it's usually a sign that there's no secret relationship. The way people act around each other can tell you a lot, even without them saying a word. Story 5. I've got a funny little story about this. So I vape, and I tend to vape quite a bit on my 20-minute drive to work. One morning, I pull into the parking lot, and one of my female coworkers says to me, "It's hilarious seeing you blowing huge vape clouds out of your car every morning. I sup always right behind you on my way to work." Fast forward about 2, 3 weeks, and another colleague, a guy this time, mentions that he lives just a few streets away from me. He says, "I sipped him always a couple of minutes behind you on the way to work, and I see you puffing out those clouds from your driver's side window." And then it all clicked. Why? I wondered. were two of my coworkers always just behind me in traffic every single day. Turns out she would drive to work from his place in her own car, all because they didn't want anyone at the office to find out. Guess I was just the perfect cover. Story 6. When two coworkers literally can't stay off the phone for an entire shift and they're talking to each other the whole time. Yeah, that's what I'm dealing with. I work overnight retail. There's this woman who always has an earpiece in, and the guy she's constantly talking to does too. Even though they're assigned to completely different departments, they're on the phone together all night long. At first I thought people were exaggerating, but then she was scheduled with me, and wow, they weren't kidding. She did a terrible job, kept disappearing, and when I'd try to find her, surprise, surprise, they were together, off in a corner, chatting away like they're at a picnic instead of work. Oh, and bonus points. He's married. And yes, I've seen him sneak a slap to her ass when they think no one's watching. I can't stand cheaters, but hey, none of my business until it starts affecting my work. That night, I started keeping a log of every time she disappeared and how long she was gone. Not because I want to stir the pot, but because I wasn't about to get blamed if we didn't finish our tasks. If she bailed early and left me to clean up, which she almost did, or if a manager came at me for the lack of progress, that log was going to be my insurance. Sadly, our management is already kind of useless. I've reported someone before for even worse behavior, disappearing for 30+ minutes at a time, late from breaks, you name it, and nothing happened. So yeah, I didn't bother turning this in. But you better believe I wasn't going to get written up for someone else's laziness. Story 7. Over time, I started noticing a lot of concerning behavior from my soon-to-be ex. They found every excuse to hang out with a guy they claimed was just a friend. One time I asked if she was going to see him, and she said, I wasn't planning on it, but that's a good idea. Later I found out that was the first time she had given him an under-the-pants action in the back of his mom's car at a truck stop on the freeway. The reason she gave for leaving to see him was that we had been arguing, and she claimed to be afraid of me even though I wasn't angry, just upset. It was clear she was using our disagreement as an excuse to see him. She also started doing things that were totally out of character for her. She suddenly started going out to bars, claiming she was just enjoying live music. I was shocked because she'd never been interested in live music before. She couldn't answer her phone when she was out with him because she was too busy enjoying the music, but she was always glued to her phone otherwise. Then she started being secretive about her phone. She would turn the volume down on her phone when listening to voice messages from him, and she'd delete her messenger history, but still try to show me her messages, saying, see, nothing is going on. At one point, she even put a password on her phone for the first time ever. Suddenly, she became super secretive, making phone calls to him when she got in the car and staying on the phone for another 20 minutes when she got home. She also broke a long-standing rule we had in our relationship of not being alone with a person of the opposite gender in a car or private place. When I brought it up, she gaslit me, claiming it was never a rule. She started getting extremely suspicious when I talked to any women, even in innocent conversations. She'd demand to see my phone but wouldn't let me see hers, and she even changed her phone's notification settings so I couldn't see the contents of her texts. She started sitting in a way where I couldn't see her phone screen. Even when we were together, it was like she was trying to hide everything. Then I noticed that the person she was cheating with was the first person she talked to in the morning and the last person at night. She'd call him to make sure she didn't miss her alarm and stay up until late messaging him, even though she had to get up early for work. Then there were the long phone calls that would last for hours. She went to visit him when he was going through a hard time and stayed at his house, claiming it was cheaper than a hotel. She said she was sleeping on the couch, though she also insisted that there were other people around, so she wasn't alone with him. And when she came back from spending the whole day with him, she had nothing to show for it, despite claiming she was there to teach him how to bake keto recipes. She started avoiding me in bed, turning away and sleeping as far away as possible. And when she started going out with him, her wardrobe changed drastically. She tried to leave the house wearing a see-through red top, claiming it was party attire. It was lingerie, and I convinced her to change. But when she picked a skimpy dress with cutouts, she claimed she'd cover up with a jacket. There were more signs, but reliving this is just making me feel overwhelmed and depressed. This whole situation has been heartbreaking. Story 8. So my wife had this best friend from college, let's call her A. I married this guy B, and we were all part of the same friend group. There was also our mutual friend J, who hung around with us a lot. We were all close for years, until I started noticing little things between A and her husband. At first it seemed like a normal married couple bickering, but A started making more belittling comments toward him. Then when we went to dinner, if B tried to put his arm around her or get her attention, she'd subtly move away or suddenly have an urgent text to respond to. Meanwhile, Jay started giving her more attention. We were all good friends, so no one suspected anything at first. I told my wife one day, "Yeah, babe, A is sleeping with Jay." She swore that was impossible. After all, we were all at A and B's wedding party. But about a year later, A had told B she wanted a divorce. She said she couldn't take it anymore. He wasn't driven enough and wasn't in shape enough for her. She was over him. About 6 months after the divorce, A came over to my house, visibly upset and tipsy. She admitted that during the 2.5 years she and B were married, she had been sleeping with Jay for about a year, right around the time I had told my wife. I was upset because Jay had promised they'd be together if she left Bud, but after she divorced him, she and Jay went on a trip together as friends. And the next week, Jay ghosted her and got back together with his college sweetheart. For me, the telltale signs were the subtle distancing from her husband and the extra attention she was getting from Jay. The negative vibes she was giving off toward her husband, mixed with the smirks and extra care she showed Jay, were clear as day to me. Story 9. That look. Years ago, I was working in the dietary department of a hospital in a small southern town. There was an ER doctor who had recently split from his wife, who, just to add spice to the drama, was also a nurse at the same hospital. One morning, I was covering for a cafeteria worker on break when the freshly single doctor came through the serving line. Right behind him, an admissions clerk from the ER. She'd been working there longer than I had, and we were on friendly enough terms that I knew her usual vibe. But that day, something was different. Miss Admissions didn't say much. She grabbed a few self-serve items, barely acknowledged anyone behind the counter, and had that look, the one that says, "I've already seen you unclothed, and I'd like to see it again." The hungry eyes, the tunnel vision, the little smile, it was all there. Could I prove anything in court? Absolutely not. But was I 100% sure they'd done the horizontal tango at least once before that morning? Or let's be honest, maybe that morning? Oh yeah. Story 10. From personal experience, I once hooked up with a coworker, and things were going fine until her dog started coming into the office with her. At first, it wasn't a big deal, but then her dog began sitting under my desk every single day. It didn't take long for people to notice. That daily routine basically exposed us. Story 11. So my husband comes home one day, and he's talking nonstop about this coworker, someone I actually knew before he did. I mentioned something negative about her, like, "She used to be with so-and-so," and suddenly his feelings are hurt. He runs to tell her what I said, and then he starts acting like she doesn't even work there anymore. He keeps me away from all work-related events, even though I used to work at the same place. Oh, and did I mention he tried deleting her contact out of our Apple ID? I picked up his phone one day to use it and saw he hadn't quite finished deleting her info. He tried for months before I accidentally called her to see how she'd react. Of course, she ran and told him, and then they started texting so I couldn't see the call in the history. I've told him multiple times to use his own Apple ID with his own email, but he refuses to give it to me. So a few more months go by, and I finally confront him. He lies and says he didn't delete her number for almost another month. He only admitted to it recently, and his excuse was, "I knew you'd think something was going on." My real issue wasn't the deleting of the contact, but the lies and the awful things he said while trying to keep that lie going. The breaking point for me was when he sent her a text at 6 a.m. asking why she wasn't at work yet. I knew something was off, whether it was just a flirty text or they were just friends. To lie that long just didn't add up. Story 12. There's definitely a subconscious effort among some people here to avoid being seen together, clearly trying not to appear involved. I run a decently sized company, and you notice these kinds of dynamics pretty easily. A lot of my staff are in their late 20s, and, well, it's usually not hard to tell who's seeing who. One couple in particular stood out. She'd been here about a year before he joined. She worked in dispatch and customer success, and he was in sales, so they naturally communicated a lot. My office policy is pretty relaxed. Employees can come and go as they need, and only a few secure network rooms are off limits after hours. Access is all done through a phone app, thanks to Brifo, so doors, conference rooms, tech areas, personal offices are accessible 24/7. Everyone has their own office. I can't stand open floor plans. One day, we had a major client on site for a full-day meeting. Big client, over 2,500 users. The whole thing was catered and took place in our glass-walled 20-foot-long conference room. Meeting wraps around 5:15, and we go back to our desks to debrief and document things for another hour or two. I can't stand lingering food smells, so I grabbed a trash bag and some Windex, intending to clean up a bit. Now, I'm a hip check kind of guy. Phone swipe. Door opens in under a second. And when I walked in, well, let's just say I caught them in flagrante delicto on my glass conference table. This isn't just any table, it's custom. 2 metric tons of handcrafted design that took months to perfect. And there they were, scrambling to get off each other, in every sense of the word. I just paused for a second, tossed the trash bag and Windex on the table and said, "Finish, clean this room, and see me in my office." About 20 minutes later, they both came in, looking like they'd been dunked in amber. I made it clear, no more physical relationships in the office. If you're dating, that's fine. If you want to go full Discovery Channel, do it at home or in a hotel, not here. No formal reprimands, but it was also clear this had been going on for months. Pretty sure the mystery disinfectant smell on my previously pristine white chairs wasn't unrelated. They're both still working here, and still dating. Personally, I think the guy should stop dragging his feet and propose already, but hey, not my business. From a legal standpoint, there wasn't much I could do. HR had already clarified that you can't outright ban office relationships anymore, especially those outside of work hours. So after that incident, I updated the employee handbook to emphasize that all on-site behavior must remain strictly professional, no exceptions. Honestly, though, the thing that still gets me, they used my damn conference table like it was a mattress. That's the part that hurts. Story 13. Hanging together all the time at work meetings. I spent 13 years in pharma, a notorious industry for workplace hookups, and let me tell you, it was a full-on mess of adultery and upper management getting involved with reps. One particular couple stands out. Both married, both with kids, yet they were always glued to each other during work meetings. Nothing overtly inappropriate, but it was so obvious. Anytime there was downtime or an evening event, you'd find them hanging out together. I once brought my wife along to a meeting since it was in a nice location. She came with me beforehand but had to leave once the official meeting started. Spouses weren't allowed. Before her flight, we were hanging out at the pool and spotted that same couple lounging in a cabana. I casually asked my wife if she thought they were a thing. Her response, "Oh, obviously, just look at them." She didn't even know they were both married with kids. And it didn't stop there. The CFO was hooking up with a rep. Everyone knew. At one meeting in San Diego, we had an 80s themed party to close things out, and something must have gone down beforehand because she was giving him death stares all night. It was uncomfortable and very public. Then there was the Sunner VP, also cheating. His wife found out and straight up stormed into the home office to confront him. They're divorced now. I left that company 3 years ago, and thank God my current one isn't like that. The sales force is older. The culture is more professional. I'm sure there's still stuff going on. It's corporate America after all, but it's not the same sleazy circus I left behind. Story 14. This happened to me, and it still makes me laugh when I think about it. I had just started my very first job, and I was super nervous trying to make a good impression. By the end of my first day, the coworker who was assigned to train me added me on Facebook and started chatting with me. Things moved quickly from there, and within a week, we were seeing each other. It wasn't planned or anything, though probably a little fast. Anyway, a few days later, another coworker who happened to be in the same sports club as me was comforting this drunk friend of his. She was having a rough night with some relationship issues, and he was being super sweet and supportive, telling her, "You can always talk to me if you have any problems or need to vent." And then, out of nowhere, he looks at me and says, That applies to you too. It was totally in character for him, 'cause he's the kind of guy who's kind to everyone. I tried to play it off with a joke and said something like, well, I'd need to be seeing someone for that to matter, and without a dead serious face, he goes, you're seeing him coworker's name. I thought we were being subtle. It wasn't like we were hiding the relationship on purpose. We just happened to be awkward about it. Turns out literally everyone knew, even our boss, and had been deliberately pairing us up on shifts to help him out. Also, the guy from the sports club was supposed to be the one training me on my first day, but he'd been too hungover to make it in. So if he hadn't bailed, maybe none of this would have happened. Funny how things work out sometimes. Story 15. There's something subtle but super telling about the way two people who are secretly close move around each other. I've noticed that when something is going on between two people, you can often spot it in the way their physical boundaries shift. Their orbits become noticeably smaller when they're near each other. They won't even realize it, but the personal space bubble that most of us instinctively maintain doesn't exist the same way between them. They'll stand a little too close, but not in an obvious way, just enough that if you're paying attention, you realize it's not the typical distance people maintain. Also, they'll move around each other too easily, like in small spaces without the awkward missteps the rest of us make. Story 16. I work in HR, so naturally, I've come across some odd situations regarding office relationships. Someone had submitted an anonymous tip claiming that a member of senior management was having an inappropriate relationship with a female subordinate. As with any formal complaint, especially one involving a power imbalance, we had to take it seriously and investigate. So it granted me access to their work emails so I could begin going through the exchanges, looking for anything that might validate or disprove the claim. I went into it expecting some flirtation at most, but I was not prepared for what I found. Within minutes, I stumbled across an email that contained the sentence, I can still smell you on my fingers, and I swear I immediately wanted to quit HR. No part of my training or experience had me ready for that. Story 17. When you know two people before anything starts between them, it becomes pretty obvious when something shifts, especially if you're paying attention. One of the first signs is how the dynamic between them changes, especially when it comes to flirting. If they used to tease each other a lot, or had this playful back and forth, suddenly that energy cools down. Not in a natural way either, it feels almost intentional, like they're trying to dial it back so no one catches on. Another thing I've noticed is how they manage exits. They'll try their best not to leave a place together, probably to avoid drawing attention, but they'll linger around just long enough to know when the other is leaving. And then there's the way they react to things happening around them. They'll instinctively look toward each other, like sharing a silent, "Did you see that?" Even if they're on opposite sides of the room, those little glances speak volumes. It's all incredibly subtle, but once you've seen it enough times, you start recognizing the pattern instantly. Story 18. I figured out a coworker was sleeping with a married man at an old job just from watching the little things. One day she was at the store, and then he walked in. They locked eyes, then both quickly broke the connection, like they had to force themselves to look away before acting like everything was normal. It wasn't anything overt, but it felt way too charged for two people who were supposed to be casual acquaintances. At first, I didn't immediately jump to the conclusion that they were sleeping together. Her marriage had already been shaky for a while. I didn't instantly realize they were sleeping together, but something about their dynamic caught my attention. They were just a little too formal with each other, like they were trying to act normal but overcompensating. The best way I can describe it is like when you're high and trying to seem totally sober, just a touch too polite, a bit too stiff when the other walked into the room. They'd say things like, "Good morning, how are you?" instead of the usual casual, "Hey." It was clear they were trying to hide something. Story 19. It's funny how people in close relationships start adopting each other's little speech habits without even realizing it. One of the most obvious things I noticed in this situation was how one of them always had this habit of replying to something you'd say with, "Is that right?" It wasn't just a one-off thing. It was a signature phrase that stood out every time. But then after a week-long work trip, I come home, and suddenly my wife is saying the same thing all the time. At first I brushed it off, but after hearing it repeatedly, I started paying closer attention to the way she was speaking, and it made me think, wait, why is she saying that so much now? It wasn't just about the phrase itself, but about the way it seemed to appear out of nowhere right after I'd been away for a while. That's when the alarm bell started going off. It wasn't a huge red flag, but it was enough to make me wonder. And to anyone who's saying, well, people do this all the time. Yeah, I know it's common, and I do it myself too. It's natural for couples to pick up on each other's mannerisms over time. But in this case, it was the timing that made me take a closer look. It's just one of those subtle things that ended up being a key part of how I picked up on the situation. Both things can be true. People can mirror each other's speech patterns, and sometimes those little shifts can point to something more. Story 20. So, we were having this casual conversation with a group of friends about circumcision, and we started joking around, speculating who might or might not be circumcised. Then I casually asked, "What about Ben?" And out of nowhere, one of the girls in the group immediately responds with, "Oh, he's circumcised." I mean, if that's not a telltale sign of something going on, I honestly don't know what is. It was such an off-the-cuff, almost too confident response, which made it clear she had more knowledge than she should have had. Story 21. I once introduced my girlfriend to a friend of mine, and right away I noticed something off. They kept exchanging these little glances and giggles, with me stuck in the middle. It felt a bit weird, so I even said something about it right then, but they brushed it off. Turns out they were already hooking up behind my back. She had cheated on me with him, and I had no idea. Story 22. I've caught people in the act because they tried too hard to play it cool on social media, and in doing so, they made it way too obvious. They both intentionally didn't follow each other on social media, thinking that would help them avoid suspicion. They figured that if no one saw them interacting online, it would be easier to keep things secret. But of course, social media has a way of catching up with you. One day, both of them posted from the same place with similar photos. They weren't even directly tagging each other or mentioning one another in the posts, but the similarities were too much to ignore. Same spot, same time, same background. It didn't take a genius to connect the dots. Hilariously, they didn't know what the other was posting because they didn't follow one another, which ultimately led to the downfall of their discretion. Story 23. It's those little conversational clues that give things away, the kind of things people don't even realize they're doing. Like when two people glance knowingly at each other, frequently, or have friendly little side whispers because they have their own thing going on apart from the group. And they hover near each other to be physically close. All those little examples of intimacy that is only between them. I had an experience with a married ex-friend who started showing up with a woman and acting like this. From the moment I saw them together, I could immediately tell something was going on. The way they kept glancing at each other and hovering near one another was all the telltale signs of a secret relationship. They didn't even seem to be trying that hard to hide it, which honestly blew my mind. I couldn't believe he wasn't more careful, especially given that he was married. It turned out, though, that the woman had no clue he was married. She was completely unaware that everyone else knew about the affair. When she eventually found out, it was devastating for her after she realized that she had been seen as a mistress when she was the only person who didn't know what was really happening. Now she's a friend of mine and he's not. Story 24. You'd think that by trying to keep things quiet at work, you'd be able to get away with it, but it's funny how people start noticing the tiniest changes in behavior. Before you even start dating a coworker, there's always that subtle flirty energy that everyone picks up on. Then when you finally take the plunge and start dating, the plan is to keep it secret, right? So you try to tone things down at the office, trying to act like things are normal, but that shift in behavior is the most obvious giveaway. I thought I was being smooth, thinking I was pulling off some kind of undercover operation. I tried to act like nothing had changed, but I ended up making it way more obvious. Everyone could tell, especially the people I worked with every day. So I got my wake-up call one day when there was a work emergency, and her boss, who worked in a different department, called my phone. He asked if she was there because he couldn't get hold of her. I had no idea why he was asking me, so I said, "Why are you asking me?" And his response, "Relax, everyone knows. You're not exactly that good at hiding things. Now is she there or not? I need her to call so-and-so." Here I was thinking I was playing it cool, but the reality was that people notice changes in behavior, especially when you're around them all day, every day. The smallest shift is enough to make them start piecing things together. Story 25. I had a really good friendship with a now former coworker, and we used to grab lunch together quite often before COVID hit. Of course, people would joke around and make suggestions, but there was never anything going on. One day, my wife and I ended up at the same Chinese restaurant where my coworker and I used to eat, and the server was just incredibly rude to my wife. It took me a minute to figure out that the server thought I was cheating on my wife with my coworker. I turned to my wife and said, "I don't get it. We don't even do anything like play footsies under the table. We just talk about work." And my wife goes, "You mean like an old married couple?" Oh, the next week we all went back to that restaurant together. The look on the server's face when I said, "This is my friend and this is my wife," was priceless. Story 26. It's the classic case of you're not just protecting your friend, you're protecting your partner. When you see one person in a group tease or critique their friend, and the other immediately jumps to their defense with way more intensity than necessary, you can almost hear the internal alarm bells going off. It's that over-the-top reaction that makes it pretty obvious. Normally, if you're just a friend, you might laugh it off or shrug it off. But if you're romantically involved with someone, it's like you're instinctively ready to defend them, even over the smallest comment. The dynamic changes, and suddenly the playful teasing turns into something more serious, because it's not just about the joke anymore, it's about protecting something personal. It's so funny because, in those situations, it's almost like the person defending them doesn't even realize how obvious they're making it. Their defensiveness reveals a level of emotional investment that goes beyond friendship. It's not just, "Hey, that's my friend." It's, "No one talks about my partner like that," without even saying the word partner. And everyone around them catches it. Even if they don't directly say anything, it's that extra layer of energy, the way their body language tightens up, the quick response. It's like a reflex. One you don't have unless you're hiding something, or in this case, trying to cover up a much deeper connection. Story 27. I was hooking up with the receptionist at my job, and at first we thought we were being sneaky, but looking back, I realized I was doing the absolute most. I'd find excuses to walk past her desk constantly. Didn't matter if I had a reason or not. Sometimes I'd just stroll by to say hi, or come up with a completely pointless question, just for a few seconds of interaction. It wasn't long before people started to pick up on the pattern. And one day I stepped out for lunch and brought her something back without even thinking about it. That was it. The secret was officially out. But honestly, no regrets. That receptionist is now my wife, and I'd go back and do it all the same without hesitation. Story 28. When someone casually takes a bite from someone else's plate and the other person doesn't even flinch or act like it's anything out of the ordinary, it's a sign that there's some unspoken comfort or familiarity between them. It's that level of casualness that doesn't come from just being coworkers but from a deeper connection, like they've crossed that line of being comfortable enough to share food without any awkwardness. Everyone else might be watching the plate theft with a bit of shock, but the two involved, unbothered. The way they just seamlessly share food without hesitation shows they've got a bond that's more than just professional. And the best part is, when it happens in front of others, you can see the quiet acknowledgement from the people who catch on. They know what's going on, even if the couple themselves aren't exactly making it obvious. Story 29. Two of my friends who are now happily dating started sitting next to each other in class, and the vibe changed immediately. It wasn't just a couple of friends sharing notes. It was the little glances during lectures, laughing a bit too long at things only they found funny, and a growing list of inside jokes that no one else got. You could tell something was brewing beneath the surface. Our group had our suspicions, but the confirmation came one night during a chaotic round of the drunk game Kiss, Marry, or Bang. When it was the guy's turn, he accidentally blurted out her name before even listing the other options. There was an awkward silence. She did that fake surprised act, "Me, what?" while blushing and trying not to smile. That was it. The next time they denied anything was going on, no one even bothered arguing. A few months later, they were officially a couple. Honestly, we still tease them about that night. Story 30. It's always the little things that give you away, and unless you're some kind of deceitful mastermind, those tiny details will trip you up every time. Take my old job, for example. The smoke spot was out back in the alley behind the warehouse, pretty secluded. My coworker, who later became my girlfriend, and I would take our afternoon smoke breaks together. It was our little flirtation zone, a time to chat and just hang out, completely off the radar. But once we started dating, That was when everything started to shift. We thought we were being clever, no more taking breaks together, no more obvious interactions. We figured we were being sneaky, keeping our work life and personal life separate. The thing is, people are way more observant than you think. The production manager, the warehouse staff, and even the guys over in the welding shop next door, all of them figured out we were dating just because we stopped taking smoke breaks together. And that wasn't even the worst of it. The office staff also noticed we weren't sneaking, longing glances at each other in the hallways anymore. It wasn't like we were doing anything noticeable, but the absence of those things stood out even more. We were honestly so focused on trying to keep it low-key that we didn't even consider how obvious our changes in behavior were. Those little shifts that we thought were subtle were the things that gave us away. With age, you realize that if you're trying too hard to be sneaky, you're probably failing. People notice more than you think, and the more you try to hide something, the more you end up drawing attention to it. So if you're trying to pull off a secret relationship, you're probably already slipping up somewhere. Story 31. Carpooling, despite not living particularly close to each other, can be a subtle but telling sign that two people may be secretly involved with each other. It's not just about the convenience of sharing a ride, it's the extra effort that goes into coordinating schedules, making long detours, or enduring uncomfortable situations just to spend time together. It's a small sacrifice, but one that often goes unnoticed by outsiders, especially when the relationship is supposed to remain hidden. My two colleagues, Viv and Mark, who worked in the same office but lived in different neighborhoods, didn't have a lot of reason to carpool, as they could easily drive separately or take public transportation. However, they made a point of coordinating their rides, often offering vague excuses like, "I was going that way anyway," or "I just wanted to avoid the morning traffic." We noticed it, especially when the detour was clearly out of their way. The consistent, seemingly innocent trips raised some eyebrows, but the duo always made sure no one would ever catch them in a moment that gave them away. Their little carpooling routine was a telltale sign that something was happening behind the scenes. They'd take the longer route, making it seem like a casual coincidence, but their growing camaraderie during these rides suggested there was more going on. In these kinds of situations, it's the little things like going out of one's way for a ride or making an effort to spend time together when it isn't strictly necessary that can give away what two people are trying to keep secret. It's not just about the ride, it's about what that ride represents, a quiet, shared moment that holds more meaning than the ride itself. Story 32. I've got these two friends I play Destiny with, and it's honestly a little hilarious how inseparable they are. It's like there's never a time when one of them isn't online. If the other isn't, I've always felt like a bit of a third wheel when I play with them. The thing is, they don't talk like a couple, they don't do all the lovey-dovey stuff you might expect. Instead, they're always cracking each other up, just making each other laugh constantly. It was like that for about 6 months, and during that time I couldn't help but notice the connection they had, even if they weren't showing it in the usual coupley way. One day, they wanted to do a dungeon, so I jumped into the Discord call with them, and being me, I figured I'd break the ice with something a little bold. I asked, "Y'all sleeping together or what? 'Cause if not, you need to." I wasn't expecting much, just trying to make them laugh, but their reaction was priceless. They both started cracking up, and the guy, trying to keep it together, said, "Funny you say that, she just moved across the country to live with me." That moment completely blew my mind. It turned out they had been dating this whole time, but they hadn't explicitly said it, and I just stumbled upon it in the most casual, ridiculous way possible. That was about a year ago now, and they're still together. It's funny how you can be around two people for so long, and just because they don't outwardly show the typical signs, you might miss the whole thing. Sometimes it's those little inside jokes, and how comfortable they are with each other, that tell you everything without them needing to say a word. Story 33. A friend at work started secretly dating a coworker, and it became pretty obvious pretty quickly. Their interactions shifted from being casual and comfortable to almost painfully professional when others were around. You'd also notice things like sidelong glances or odd excuses about why they couldn't join the group after work, when it was clear they likely had plans together. When he finally told me, I just looked at him and said, "Yeah, no kidding," and pointed out all the signs they'd been giving off. He was genuinely surprised and thought they'd been doing a good job of keeping things on the down low. Story 34. It's wild how some people try so hard to hide things that it ends up making them more obvious. When they're at an arcade with coworkers, instead of just playing together like anyone else would, they purposely play different games, but right next to each other, as if that somehow hides the fact that something is going on between them. It's almost like they think the distance between the games will keep the whole thing a secret, but in reality, it just makes them look super suspicious. Then there's the way they act when they're out with friends. They might flirt with total strangers at the bar, as if that's some sort of cover-up to distract from whatever's happening between them. They'll do anything to throw people off the scent, even though it's pretty clear to everyone watching that something's up. And if anyone so much as thinks they're flirting with each other, they freak out. They'll make a big deal out of it, acting all defensive or awkward, trying to cover up any hint of what's going on. They go out of their way to avoid even the slightest suggestion that they might be involved. The harder they try to hide it, the more obvious it becomes. It's like they're overcompensating, and in doing so, they're only drawing more attention to the very thing they're trying to keep secret. It's almost like they don't realize that just being themselves would be enough to avoid suspicion. Story 35. I get that sometimes it's the smallest things that end up giving you away. So I had a similar experience where I was trying to keep a relationship a secret, and I noticed this odd behavior in myself that I hadn't even realized until it was pointed out. We were in a group of friends, and for whatever reason, I stopped saying thank you when my secret boyfriend would do small things like hand me a drink or pass me something while I was talking to someone else. Instead of acknowledging it like I normally would, I just carried on with my conversation, not thinking much of it. But one of my friends noticed, they pointed it out, and I had to stop and think about it for a second. It wasn't that I was being rude. For some reason, I didn't feel like saying anything in front of everyone. It was such a small thing, but it ended up making me more obvious than if I had just acted naturally. It wasn't a reflection of how I treat my partner. I still say thank you to him all the time, but in this specific situation, I wasn't thinking about how the absence of it could be a dead giveaway. It's funny how things like that can stand out when you're trying to keep things a secret. That one little change in behavior can be the thing that gives you away. Story 36. One of those things that just screams intimacy is when someone casually drops details like, oh, she hates strawberries, or he only uses that one brand of hand lotion. It's like, wait, how do you know that? Those aren't just random observations. They're the kinds of things that only come up when you've spent a significant amount of time with someone or have a deep enough connection to notice the little preferences and quirks they have. The weird thing is, when you're trying to keep something hidden, you might not even realize you're dropping these kinds of details, but when you hear someone else mention them, it feels like such a giveaway. Those tiny personal facts are the kind of stuff that a couple would naturally know about each other because they share those kinds of moments. Getting to know each other's likes, dislikes, routines, and the little things that make them, well, them. So, when someone drops those facts in a conversation, you can't help but wonder, how do they know that unless it's a subtle sign that something more is going on? And sometimes it's these tiny, seemingly insignificant details that get you caught more than any big gesture ever would. Story 37. Ah, the classic matching phase. It's so funny how people, especially those who are trying to keep things low-key, suddenly start showing up wearing similar colors, sporting the same brand, or even using identical water bottles. At first, it might seem like a coincidence, but then you start noticing it more and more. Maybe they're both wearing the same color on a random Tuesday, or their water bottles are the same style. Then it gets a little too coincidental. What's interesting is that it's usually not even an intentional thing. They don't plan to coordinate their outfits or buy the same things. But when you're spending a lot of time with someone, you start to influence each other without even realizing it. Maybe you both like the same colors, or you end up leaning towards the same brand because it's something you've both been using, or you both just grab the same kind of water bottle without thinking. But when you're trying to hide it, those little coincidences pile up and start looking like something more. It's almost like your brain starts recognizing patterns without you even noticing. And to everyone else, it starts to feel a little suspicious. It's like the universe is giving little hints that you can quite ignore. Two people spending so much time together that they start syncing up in the most subtle ways, and before you know it, the coincidences just feel like they're telling the real story. Story 38. The ultimate giveaway in the digital age, the accidental synchronization of social media activity. It's so funny and sometimes cringeworthy how people trying to keep their relationship a secret end up revealing it through these subtle, almost involuntary moments, like when two people post the same song with the same vibes, nothing directly related to each other, just a vibe that happens to match, or even better, when they post vague captions at the same time, making you think, huh, is that about something specific? But when they post travel pictures or snapshots from different places, but somehow the lighting is the same. It's like they don't realize they're painting the same picture in everyone's mind. One person is at a beach, the other at a park, but somehow the sunset or the golden hour light is the same in both shots. It's that little tell that makes it too obvious. They were in the same place at some point, just not posting about it at the same time. It's not like they're sharing a picture of them kissing or holding hands, but it's these little details like timing, lighting, or song choices that tip people off without even realizing it. They're creating a trail that's easier to follow than they think. It's the digital version of saying something without saying anything, and it's always fun and kind of awkward to watch when you know what's going on. Story 39. I once did something, but it was totally by accident. I didn't suspect anything was going on between them at the time. I told my manager that I had a crush on one of my coworkers. We worked at a restaurant, so workplace relationships weren't that uncommon, and this particular coworker and I were pretty good friends. The manager responded with something like, "You and everybody else, it seems." I thought he was just referring to how the line cooks often mentioned how attractive she was. He also mentioned that they lived in the same neighborhood and hung out frequently, offering to put in a good word for me. I eagerly accepted, but honestly, I never really felt any romantic vibes from her, so I just let it slide. Later, I found out they'd been secretly dating for a couple of years by that point, and that's when I realized all the subtle hints my manager had been trying to drop in the conversation. I was so embarrassed. We never really addressed it directly, and we're all still friends. But in the end, he chose to resign when the rest of the management found out he was dating his direct subordinate. Story 40. When two people are constantly bantering back and forth, with that playful smile exchange that's just a little too inside, it's almost like they forget the rest of the world is watching. They think they're being clever, keeping things under wraps, but the energy between them is so obvious that everyone else starts picking up on it. It's the way their jokes don't quite match the situation, or how they both know the punchline before it's even delivered. They share little looks and subtle, playful jabs, like a secret language that only they understand. And in their minds, they're just having fun, maybe even keeping it low-key. But to everyone around them, it's a neon sign flashing. We're more than just friends. The thing is, banter is usually harmless when it's just two people messing around. But when there's that certain chemistry, it becomes so much more than just playful teasing. It's loaded with meaning, and even the smallest exchange feels like a confession, whether they realize it or not. And the smiles, those shared looks, are not as hidden as they think it is. The way they look at each other with that knowing, almost affectionate gaze doesn't scream friends. In the end, they may think they're getting away with it, but the playful nature of it all just makes it too obvious to anyone paying attention. Story 41. You know those moments when you've heard the rumors, and everyone's kind of whispering, but you can't be sure until something little happens. That reunion show moment was it. The fact that they were the only two people who didn't hug, while the other 14 or so cast members were greeting each other with open arms, says a lot without saying a word. It's one of those things where you think, why the heck wouldn't they hug? It's a reunion. Everyone's excited to see each other. But then it hits you. The why is because there's tension between them, the kind that can't be ignored. They didn't need to say anything or make it obvious. Their actions spoke volumes. The awkwardness of not hugging, the clear distance between them while everyone else was happily greeting one another, was like a spotlight on their unspoken relationship. And what's even crazier is that, in a room full of people, this small moment was the one that gave away everything. The hug, the lack of one, was a huge tell. Suddenly, the rumors didn't seem so far-fetched anymore, and it was almost like the show itself revealed the truth. Talk about a slip-up that spoke louder than words ever could. Story 42. My husband and I used to work at the same office, which had at least 100 people. He was the cool guy, always surrounded by women at his desk, while I was the uptight teacher's pet type. The few times we smiled and said hi in front of others, he'd be pulled away and told to stay away from me, either because I'd get him in trouble for not working or because I wasn't pretty enough for him. After a year of dating, we decided to elope. While I might not have been the prettiest girl, I knew I was his other half, and we genuinely enjoyed each other's company. So I did all the paperwork and submitted my new last name to corporate. The next thing I knew, my husband started getting tons of IMs and emails, asking if he knew why I would go so far as to take his last name, especially since no one knew we were even friends, let alone secretly dating and eloping. It was kind of hilarious. More than a decade and a few kids later, I love that man more than anything. He's my sweetheart. Story 43. When two people suddenly find themselves on the same health journey, like a sugar detox challenge, or going vegan together, it's like the universe is just begging for the obvious to be pointed out. They might think they're being super casual about it, but the synchrony is the red flag waving right in front of everyone. The thing about these health challenges is that they're usually done for personal reasons. But when you're doing them at the same time with someone, especially when it's paired with those little awkward moments, it screams more than just a healthy lifestyle choice. It's like their attempt to make it seem normal ends up drawing more attention to how not normal it is. I mean, seriously, when they both start cutting sugar at the same time and everyone notices they're so in sync, it's kind of hard to ignore. The giggles and eye contact, that's the real giveaway. When you can't even look someone in the eye without giving it away, it's confirmation that there's more going on than just a shared health kick. And then 6 months later, they finally admit it. The funny thing is, everyone already knew long before they owned up to it. Sometimes trying to keep it low-key only makes it more obvious, and those cute little side glances and bashful laughs are the telltale signs that you're dealing with more than just a detox challenge. Story 44. When someone goes out of their way to exaggerate how gross or annoying another person is, especially when no one asked, it often feels like overcompensation, like they're trying too hard to convince everyone, and maybe even themselves, that nothing is going on. Ironically, it ends up doing the opposite. It makes people more suspicious, especially if the person they're bad-mouthing doesn't seem that bad to others. That kind of intensity, especially out of nowhere, often points to an emotional entanglement they're not owning up to. It's like a reverse red flag. You're not supposed to notice the attraction, so they smother it in fake disdain. Story 45. You ever just know someone's got a thing going on before they even admit it? That was Jim, 100%. He was always finding reasons to be at reception, like, constantly, need a pen? Reception. Bored? Reception. Want to chat about absolutely nothing for 10 minutes? Reception. And we all knew it wasn't because he loved the front desk decor. Meanwhile, the rest of us are busting our bum on calls, trying to hit our numbers, and Jim's out here working on his flirt-to-close ratio. So eventually, someone just snapped and went straight to Michael, our manager. Like, bro, subtlety is not your strong suit. Story 46. When someone's phone keeps buzzing with text alerts, and they act all sneaky about it, constantly glancing at each other or trying to hide the screen, they might try to play it cool or brush it off, but the way they keep checking their phones and acting a little too aware of each other's movements is a pretty clear giveaway. It's like they're trying to maintain this facade that everything's casual, but you can hide that kind of energy. The way they glance at each other, maybe a little too often, or the way they exchange those knowing looks when their phones light up, it's as if they're in on some inside joke that no one else knows. Whether they're trying to cover up a secret or just enjoy some quiet moments of communication, their phones and those furtive glances raise suspicion. Story 47. When someone starts talking about another person too much, especially someone of the opposite gender, it's usually a sign they're thinking about them more than they let on. And then when that person is suddenly hanging out with them for hours outside of work, it's hard not to notice the shift in behavior. You picked up on it before he could even admit it. And that moment when they screamed and got defensive was probably them trying to cover up the truth. It's interesting how people often try to hide things and think they're doing a great job, but in reality, it's the little things, the constant mentioning, the defensiveness, the sudden changes in behavior that give it all away. You saw right through it and called them out, even before they confessed. It's like you could sense the energy shifting before the truth even came out. Story 48. When two people are secretly involved, their physical closeness tends to stand out. They might sit next to each other, walk closely, or stand with their bodies naturally turned toward each other more than usual. It's that kind of physical comfort that hints at something more, especially when it's subtle but noticeable, like touching or scratching their own body in ways they wouldn't usually do around others. You know, that little bit of extra ease with their movements that might seem insignificant, but in the context of their behavior, it's a telltale sign that there's something deeper going on. These small but significant gestures can give away the quiet signals of a secret relationship. Story 49. At work, there were three different couples, all married to other people. And I knew, well, a lot of us knew, that they were all hooking up. It wasn't subtle. They'd go to lunch together, leave at the same time, but try to look like they weren't together and schedule off-site meetings simultaneously. But the most obvious giveaway was how they looked at each other. You could tell, no matter how hard they tried to act normal, that something had just gone down. It's really hard to hide that just hooked up vibe before an afternoon meeting. Eventually, all three couples ended up leaving their spouses and getting together. It's been years now, and surprisingly, they're still all together. Story 50. I've got a tangentially related story about how my coworkers eventually found out about my secret relationship. At the time, my spouse and I were long-term partners working in the same office at a university. It was a tiny room, about 400 feet square, with 6 computers, so things were super tight. Somehow, we managed to keep our relationship hidden for 2 years by just acting like any other coworkers. We weren't hiding it on purpose. We simply didn't think about it and never mentioned it to anyone. The secret finally came out when she started buying me lunch multiple times over a couple of weeks, a new habit we'd picked up due to our different schedules. At first, our coworkers just thought we were friends, but eventually they asked and we told them the truth. They were blown away by the fact that we'd kept it a secret for so long. Honestly, it wasn't difficult. We were just professionals and complete nerds. We've been married for 9 years now. Story 51. I knew my ex was cheating on me long before he ever admitted it, and the biggest clue was how often he started talking about his female coworker. At first, it was just a few mentions here and there, but soon it escalated to him spending 4 or 5 hours after work hanging out with her. I finally called him out on it, saying he had to be hooking up with her. He got so defensive, screamed at me like I was crazy. Fast forward 4 months after I broke up with him, after a 7-year relationship, and he finally confessed. I told him I already knew, but I appreciated the confirmation. Story 52. They always get weirdly awkward whenever someone walks up to them while they're talking. Like, I'm not even trying to interrupt anything. I just want to grab a cup of coffee. But the moment I approach and they're standing in front of the machine together, the whole vibe shifts. Suddenly, it's like I walked in on something private, and honestly, I wasn't even suspicious at first. I didn't think anything of it. People chat all the time at work, but the way they instantly fumble over their words or suddenly go quiet when someone else comes around is what makes it noticeable. It's strange because there's no rule against being friends or having a casual conversation in front of the coffee machine. Just talk and move aside like normal people. The awkwardness is what makes it feel like there's something more going on, even if there isn't. Story 53. It's definitely the awkward avoidance of one another for no reason. Back when I was a supervisor, I had 2 employees who were trying to keep their relationship under wraps. They were young, probably around 19 or 20, and as sweet as they were, they didn't quite have the skills to hide their feelings without acting like they couldn't stand each other. It was almost comical how much they overcorrected. Instead of just being casual coworkers, they'd go out of their way to avoid talking, barely make eye contact, and act like the other didn't exist. It was so obvious I figured it out on day 1. I remember thinking it was hilariously cute when they finally told me I told them I already knew. They were flabbergasted that I figured it out. It wasn't that hard. When y'all make googly eyes at one another across the store or try to surreptitiously touch hands at the till, I'm gonna notice. Story 54. It's funny how when 2 people are hiding something, the smallest things can make them act super weird. When friends start acting playful or joking around, it's completely normal, but when there's something more going on between them, suddenly they freeze up. It's like the moment they realize something could be misinterpreted, they just stop, even though in reality, no one would think twice about it. The awkwardness comes from the fact that they know exactly what's going on, and they're worried about how their behavior might look to others. They'll pull back from doing something completely normal, like a playful nudge or inside joke, just because they're paranoid it'll give them away. It's almost as if they're so aware of how their actions can be perceived that they get in their heads. In truth, if they were trying so hard to hide things, no one would even think twice about it. But the fact that they start acting awkwardly only highlights the fact that they're hiding something, making it way more obvious. Story 55. Trust your gut. It's usually your best guide. Beyond that, you can often pick up on chemistry between people just by how they look at each other or flirt. Body language rarely lies. If you're worried your significant other might be involved with someone else, pay attention to the shifts in behavior. Are they suddenly secretive with their phone? Do they flip it over when a message comes in or step away to take calls? Are they accusing you of cheating out of nowhere? That kind of projection often stems from guilt. They're doing something shady and deflecting it onto you. Has their interest in intimacy dropped off completely? While this alone isn't proof, it can be a red flag, especially when combined with other suspicious behaviors. My advice? Talk to them. Bring it up honestly and directly. If they can have a mature conversation or get defensive and explode, that tells you all you need to know. Don't tolerate infidelity. No matter the situation, you're never truly stuck. You always have a choice. And remember, words mean nothing without action. If they say they'll change but their behavior stays the same, they're not changing, they're just buying time. Story 56. Reading this whole post really made me stop and wonder how many people might have assumed I was sleeping with coworkers, because honestly, so many of these signs happened to me completely innocently. One coworker was just naturally more comfortable being in my personal space. Another was a best friend for years. There was even a married guy I harmlessly flirted with. We both knew our boundaries and were loyal to our partners. I once talked so much about a new hire that my husband actually commented on it. I caught myself and made a mental note to dial it back, and admittedly did it again a couple of years later. New people are interesting. What can I say? As a close-knit team, we often shared knowing glances in social settings, could talk about anything, and didn't think twice about who we had lunch with, male or female. Sometimes we ended up in nice restaurants on work trips, and it was all completely platonic. Everyone knew my husband was a bit on the shy side, so we toned down the banter around him. He often joined us for lunch and worked pretty closely with our team. Those guys could make me blush without saying a single inappropriate word, and no matter what, they had my back. I really miss that crew. For the record, I never slept with anyone but my husband, and he wasn't even a coworker at the time. I'm a firm believer in following your gut. If something feels off, trust that instinct. But also remember, not everything is exactly what it looks like from the outside. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.